right, joining me now is Wes Golberg of Locked On Heat, our Miami Heat correspondent for the Alley Oop. Really appreciate you stopping by, Wes. We just had a massive trade for the Miami Heat as it kind of like preempts what I think is going to be an interesting playoff run for this team once again. Tell me about Terry Rozier. Tell me about this deal.
So the Heat send out Kyle Lowry and a 2027 first-round pick for an upgrade at the position. I don't think there's any doubt that Terry Rozier is an upgrade at that position. The Kyle Lowry thing just ran its course. He just wasn't as productive as he had been, especially after the turn of the year. Wasn't shooting the ball particularly well. Wasn't shooting it a lot. And in today's NBA, you just need a little bit more oomph in your offense. And Miami was ranked 20th in offensive rating, and they understood as an organization, we got to do something to get better on that end. And so they go ahead and swap Kyle Lowry for Terry Rozier. And Rozier makes a lot of sense, I think, for the Heat. From a cultural standpoint, he's a fit. He grew up a huge Dwayne Wade fan, like it was his childhood idol. So he's sort of always been kind of tuned into Miami. I think these two parties have circled each other a couple of different times. But on the court, also, he puts pressure on the rim, which is something that the Heat weren't really getting from, well, they weren't getting from Kyle Lowry, and they weren't getting it from a lot of other places consistently. Rozier averages 4.5 shot attempts at the basket per game. That's twice what Tyler Herro generates within 3 feet of the basket. That is like 450% of what Kyle Lowry was giving them at that position, and it's about the same as what Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo do in terms of their rim pressure. So if you kind of frame it that way, you're adding another Jimmy Butler, you're adding another Bam Adebayo to this offense, again, just as it relates to rim pressure, and that's huge for Miami because all of their main actions kind of come out of that. It comes out of Jimmy Butler driving and kicking to shooters, Bam Adebayo getting to the basket, passing to open shooters beyond the arc, and so if Rozier can give them that, it's going to help them get more pressure at the basket. It's going to help create more open shots for his teammates. And hopefully the idea is that Miami's offensive rating floats from out of the bottom 10 to something at least close to league average.
Yeah, Rozier's averaging 23 points per game, which would lead Miami. I don't expect him to continue leading Miami just because like he'll fit in more to the culture and what is expected of him kind of in the I would expect a second, third, fourth option role for most of the time, but it just gives you so much more flexibility to be able to mix and match different groups and lineups and build some interesting units. And so I thought this was a home run for both teams. I think 2027 Miami first, like that could be good. We'll see what happens when 3 years from now roll around, but I think it'll be fascinating. But only one first does feel like a win for Miami here. Anything else that you think that they could do at the deadline?
They still have one other first that they're able to trade between now and the deadline. They can trade a 2030 first, I believe. I don't anticipate them doing that. I think this is very similar to what the Lakers did last year, kind of towing the line, understanding that, you know what, this Russell Westbrook thing isn't working. We got to try to maximize the LeBron James window. We don't want to move the 2 first-round picks that we have available, but we're willing to move one and protect that to a certain degree. That's kind of Miami's version of this this year. This is the big swing. That said, I think there are other things that they can do that don't include that first-round pick. Caleb Martin's free agency is sort of looming over this team. He's gonna opt. He's gonna be able to opt out after this year. Everybody expects him to. He's gonna be able to make a lot more than the $6 million that he's making now, or the $7 million that he would make next year. So if he opts out and enters free agency, the other thing that this Terry Rozier trade does is it puts the Heat very, very close to that second tax apron and firmly within the first luxury tax going into next year. You have 5 guys making $20 million plus already under contract for next year between Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson, who's right around that figure, and then obviously now with Terry Rozier. So by trading Kyle Lowry's expiring contract that would have come off the books and adding another $24 million salary player for next year, you've basically punted on the opportunity to re-sign Caleb Martin. They have his bird rights, they could do it, but they're not going to bring him back if it means going into that second tax apron. So if he's going to be a free agent, I think you have to explore what it is that you can get for him as opposed to letting him walk away for nothing. That said, the Rozier trade is also signaling, hey, we're trying to maximize this window. So if anything that's out there for Caleb Martin doesn't at least, if it makes you worse to the point where you can't maximize that window, then I don't think the Heat are going to do it. So in other words, they're not going to just trade Caleb Martin for anything. But I think you have to go out there and explore, is there a guy on like a rookie scale contract or a team controlled contract next year who could be a depth piece, a rotation piece for us, that even if that player is not quite as good as Caleb Martin, he could be a rotation piece for 2 years as opposed to Caleb Martin, who's only going to be a rotation piece for the rest of this year, barring anything unforeseen. So I think that they could, and I think Caleb Martin has value across the league for certain teams. If you're a contending team that needs some wing defense and some shot making and some playoff experience, Caleb Martin makes a lot of sense for you. I look at a team like Sacramento. I think they would love to have Caleb Martin in that building. I think Dallas would love to have Caleb Martin in their building. Like, these are teams that make sense. It just depends on what you would get back if you were the Miami Heat. So I think that's a move that they can make too. In terms of anything else, some people are asking whether or not Tyler Herro's days in Miami are numbered because of this Terry Rozier trade. I don't see the acquisition of Rozier meaning that that they're ready to move off of Tyler Herro. I think the plan is to try to get both of those guys to play together. Duncan Robinson, I think, is an interesting case study here, but based on what he's giving Miami this year, I don't think that they really feel a need to move him, and I don't know that what you would trade him for would be a meaningful upgrade to any other position on the roster. I think this team was going to look for front court help now that they've kind of addressed the backcourt. They might not be done looking at the backcourt either, by the way. I think that there's other moves that could be made to shore up their point guard depth behind Terry Rozier, because they still only have one sort of traditional point guard on the roster, so they could look to add another one there. And then, of course, there's the buyout market. And by making this trade, they have created the taxpayer mid-level exception that wasn't available to them before. They now have that available to them now. So they now become a player on the buyout market should somebody that makes sense become available.
Should be fascinating. There's a lot of different elements that they could add to this group that I think makes some sense. Right now, the circle of trust guys, I think, are pretty interesting. You've got the main, I'd say, four guys with Terry Rozier, Jimmy Butler, Tyler Herro, Bam Adebayo. Like, there's your starting four. I think Jaime Jaquez has really entered into that group as well. Caleb Martin's there too. Is there anybody else in that circle of trust that I'm missing at this point?
I would put Duncan in there in terms of, what you're getting from him every time. The defensive inefficiencies are there, but Eric Spoelstra knows what those inefficiencies are at this point, so we can cover up for them and plan for them. So I'd put Duncan in there. It'll be really interesting to see how this team starts games and how it closes games. I think now we might see Nikola Jovic come out of that starting lineup. He had started, the second-year forward had started the last 10 games for Miami because they were trying to create some sort of juice on offense, some sort of high watermark, and it didn't really work. Now that they made the Rozier deal, Jovic becomes not as needed in that starting lineup. Do you go a little bit more defensive leaning at the fifth starter spot? I could see Haywood Highsmith getting back into that starting group, and I think that would make a lot of sense for that team. And then for closing games, I think Jaime Jaquez Jr., when he comes back from this groin strain, has a real claim to maybe close these games. I think Rozier, Herro, Jimmy, Jaquez, and Bam might be the way that Eric Spoelstra wants to close these things.
Wild. It's so cool, man. Like, this is such a rare thing in the NBA where you get a guy like a Jaquez who he leads the team in minutes still. He's had this groin strain and he leads the team in minutes. I've just been so impressed with him. What do people on the outside still not get about Jaime Jaquez?
I don't know. Every time I talk to anybody on the outside, they're like, is Jaime Jaquez the best? And I was like, yeah, I think he might be the best. Like, it's just, people love Jaime Jaquez. I think everybody kind of gets it. He's got this old school, like, throwback game ripped right from, like, the Kobe Bryant playbook. Like, he grew up idolizing Kobe Bryant, just watching Kobe Bryant highlights on YouTube and things like that. Obviously, he's a SoCal guy, so it makes sense. But he also grew up watching a lot of Dwayne Wade. He grew up watching a lot of DeMar DeRozan, like these kinds of guys. So he's kind of brought back footwork to his generation. He's sort of like the patron saint of footwork for Gen Z, I guess, is his title now. And so it's a lot of fun to watch him. His instant offense is so important to this team. The fact that he's been out over these last 6 games and Miami has had a hard time even cracking 100 points over these 6 games, it's not entirely on the fact that Jaquez is not playing, but it would have helped to have him. And you can almost, it's crazy. You can feel the difference when the rookie isn't in there. Like, this is a team that just was in the NBA Finals, and they kind of need this rookie in a very important way. So he's been awesome for them. The coaching staff loves him. His teammates love him. And more importantly, man, like, he is a fan favorite in Miami. I think the Latin culture part of it obviously helps. Like, people, I'm at these games and people cheer louder for Jaime Jaquez than they do for Jimmy Butler sometimes. It's crazy how the fan base has reacted and responded to this guy. And the front office, by the way, is all the way in on Jaime Jaquez. I don't think they would trade him for much of anything at this point. I think they really want to see this through. And yeah, this is a guy who I think is, like I said, could be part of the closing mix. He could be the starter. I think he's inarguably one of Miami's best 5 players right now. And when you talk about what this looks like in the playoffs, he gives them an element they didn't have last year in terms of being able to carry an offensive unit, a second unit for stretches. Like, they didn't have that guy last year, especially with Tyler Herro having broken his hand in the first playoff game. So if you got Herro back healthy, if you got Jaquez back healthy, if you can get more from Jimmy Butler, because I think it's been a little bit of a disappointing regular season for him, but if you maybe pencil in a better postseason for him, who knows what this team can do.
And you've got Rozier added to that too. Like, it's just,
yeah,
it feels like this team just has more weapons. Like, it's something that we haven't really been able to discuss for much of the season, but now you start to see the vision. You start to see it manifest a little bit more. And like, I remember back to the finals, just covering that. It felt like the Jimmy and Bam show, and whatever you were getting for anybody else, it was gravy. It was an awesome thing that you were able to get the value add, but for the most part, it was Jimmy and Bam just trying to do their thing. Now you've got so many other options at your disposal, and I think Eric Spoelstra, one of the best coaches at using options that he has, and will continue to figure that out. Final couple of things here. How much should top contenders still fear Miami? How much should Boston, Philly, Milwaukee, these teams that are still at the top of the East, just like last year, how much should those top teams fear the Miami Heat?
A healthy amount. I mean, if you're Milwaukee, why wouldn't you? If you're Boston, why wouldn't you? If you're Philadelphia, why wouldn't you? I know these teams are all different, Philly, Boston, Milwaukee, but they're not so different that those memories are gone, right? Like, the Heat have beaten all of those teams, in some cases multiple times, in the playoffs. I said this last year. I think the most dominant presence in the Western Conference bracket was Nikola Jokic. I think the most dominant presence in the Eastern Conference bracket was Eric Spoelstra. And Eric Spoelstra is going to coach circles around all the coaches we just talked about. Like, he just is. Even Nick Nurse, who's doing an awesome job in Philadelphia. Like, Eric Spoelstra just hits a different level in the postseason. I think those coaches have a respect for what Spo is doing and can do and how he game plans. You talk to scouts across the NBA, and they're always like, Miami just keeps finding ways to change. You always hear that, like, Miami always finds ways to win. Yeah, that's true. The Heat always find ways to change also throughout the course of regular season and a postseason. They're always going to keep opponents on their heels. Their scouting report could be old 2 weeks after it's done, a week after it's done, because of how much Eric Spoelstra is tinkering with everything from strategy to lineups to game plans to whatever it is. So, look, I think if you're Boston, if you're Philly or if you're Milwaukee, you haven't earned anything, man. Like, you haven't. Like, Boston, like, you haven't won a championship. I know Milwaukee has, but they're very different than when they had. Different coach, a lot of different supporting cast. Philadelphia hasn't won a championship. You have to fear the Miami Heat, who are the team over the last decade who has won more playoff series than any other team in the league. So I'm not saying that they're the favorites in the Eastern Conference, and I don't think that they should be, but you've got to be insane if you're not at least respectfully fearful of them.
There's no doubt. Like, the 8th seed, I think, masked a lot of the power that Miami had last year. There was clear that they, like, you just know that Jimmy can get to that level. You know that Bam can get to that level. And all you need is some hot shooting. All you need is some guys that make the open shots that those guys are generating for them in a playoff environment. And Terry Rozier, been a clutch guy. He can do that. Tyler Herro, we'll see, because he's been out at some of those points, but I think he can do that. Jaime Jaquez, I know he's a rookie, but like, he's already stepped up to the table so many times. I don't expect him to falter anytime soon. Like, this is a group that you fear. This is a group that if you are facing in the playoffs, you are shitting bricks. It's just a crazy environment for all of those teams that know exactly what Miami is capable of night in, night out. So I'm really looking forward to it, man. Any final takeaways before we get out of here?
I think the priority for the Miami Heat now should be, all right, let's see what we can do on the minor fringes of the roster. Can we balance the roster a little bit more with another move here or there? They're going to scan the buyout market. I do think they want to avoid the play-in tournament. You don't want to end up in the same situation as they were last season, a quarter away against the Chicago Bulls from not even getting the 8th seed altogether.
Right.
The East is kind of stacked at the top 3 between those teams we were talking about. Cleveland and the Knicks have made a run here where they're sort of separating themselves at 4 and 5. Behind Miami right now, and actually they're in a virtual tie at this point, are the Indiana Pacers, who, of course, just added Pascal Siakam. They'll get Tyrese Halliburton coming back here pretty soon. So nothing's guaranteed for Miami in terms of just making the playoffs. They're pretty much guaranteed a play-in spot at this point, but as we know, that there's no guarantee coming out of the play-in. So I think the priority does need to. I don't think that this is a situation where the Heat have figured out that the regular season doesn't matter. Just get us to the postseason. No. They didn't want to be in the play-in tournament last year. They don't want to be in the play-in tournament this year. They got to try to get a top 6 seed. So I think in that sense, the regular season does matter. They got to fix that offense, whether it's playoffs or regular season. They got to get out of 20th. They got to get out of the bottom 10 in offensive rating, and they got to do it while also maintaining a top 10 defensive rating. It's not easy. It's not going to be easy. They're going to need to see a lot more from Terry Rozier on the defensive end than he was showing the last couple of years in Charlotte. I think he's game for it, and I think we're probably going to see the best Miami Heat basketball going forward, but that's not to say that there's not some kinks that they need to work out.
We will see if they can. It should be a fascinating journey. He is Wes Golberg of Locked On Heat. Really appreciate you stopping by, man. I'm looking forward to our next chat in about 6 weeks, all right?
Thanks, buddy.